Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all for being here. I would just start by giving you a little bit of introduction to Professor de Sherbinin. He's the director and senior research scientist at the Center for Integrated Earth System Information, which is a spatial data and analysis center within the Columbia Climate School. The center specializes in the human aspects of global environment change. Dr. Sherbinin is trained as a geographer. There are several in the room, so they'll be happy to know that. And also has several other teaching and research affiliations at Columbia, spanning sustainability and climate science, climate mobility, and forced migration. He's the editor of the climate mobility section of the prominent journal Frontiers in Climate, the co-author of World Bank's Groundswell Report Series and the biannual Environmental Performance Index, EPI, which is a joint project of Yale and Columbia. He's led basic and applied research projects funded by NASA, DoD, UNDP, UNEP, and the US Agency for Development. There's a very long bio after that, which I won't read, but I just wanted to say enough to give you a sense of the breadth and span of his work. And with that, if I could invite you to deliver your talks.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I really thank you for your warm welcome to the center here to NIAU. I'm going to give a little background on this talk series. First of all, I just mentioned that this was organized. My primary interface was with the Global Center, which is one of 12 global centers around the world of Columbia University, and so I have visited the Mumbai Global Center on a prior visit to India, and so it's a great pleasure to be back in India. Currently here teaching a course in the Global Initiative for Academic Networks, GIAN, of the Ministry of Education at Jamia Millia Islamia University. That's what brings me to Delhi, and I'm really pleased to be here. I'm going to just read a little text about what this series relates to, so that those who are online or in the room can better understand this expert talks series. So in collaboration with the Columbia Global Center in Mumbai, the series focuses on the theme of sustainable cities, specifically addressing city risk and vulnerability assessment, early warning and emergency response, and climate-proof infrastructure. The aim of the collaboration is to leverage climate expertise from Columbia University to deepen the foundational understanding of climate science among government leaders and equip them with practical skills for designing and implementing locally responsive mitigation and adaptation strategies. With that, I'll go ahead and proceed to share my screen and project some slides. The topic today is climate impacts on rural to urban migration. Are cities ready for the influx? So what you'll see is I'll be talking first about the potential of climate change to induce further rural or more rural to urban migration. And we have a research project that's actually funded by Columbia Global. It's and I'll talk more about that in a moment, but I'll be presenting some early results of that research before we go to the field to do field research. I'll talk a little bit about trends and projections of urbanization and trends and projections of climate hazards in general and a kind of global perspective with some reference to India. And then I'm going to talk specifically about another Columbia CIESIN research project, which is on climate impacts on poor populations, really globally, but I'm going to be focusing on the results that we have for Asia. If there is a time that allows, I'll talk about adaptation options, but I think that maybe it's enough to just set out the problem space today, and then you all could maybe, from there, we could have a conversation around adaptation options. So this is a project called Displaced Livelihoods, and it focuses on drought impacts on ag labor force participation in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. I am not the lead of the research team, but I've been involved since the beginning. My postdoc and staff member, Fabien Cotier, leads this work, and I continue to support it. So one of the premises is the agricultural sector in India is exposed to extreme heat, droughts, and floods. So if stressors are drivers of rural to urban migration, it's likely to increase urbanization rates and may increase the growth of slums and informal settlements in large cities in India. In India, there are about 150 million households that are dependent on agriculture as their main source of income. which, if you multiply by the average household size, results in about 600 million people who are working in the agricultural sector. We have two major impacts on agriculture. There are others, of course, flood and things like that, but the ones that we're going to be investigating today as I go through the presentation is heat waves and droughts. We're not expecting from these climate impacts long-term permanent migration, but rather, and that's partly because of these strong local ties to ancestral lands and attachments, often that prevent the kind of mass relocation of entire households. So I think that sort of sets the framework anyway of what we're doing here. What I will say is that if you look at India as, I have to remove this here, loading these controls. If you look at percentage of population, very low levels. So basically, India has among the lowest migration rates from rural areas to urban areas on a permanent basis globally. So, what we see instead is, in absence of local work opportunities outside of the agricultural sector, there's a lot of circular labor migration between the rural and the urban areas. There's also strong gender dynamics, and most of you are aware that most of this migration is migrants reside and work away from their village for most of the calendar year, typically 9 to 11 months, and for many it's consecutive years, returning only briefly during major festivals, weddings, or other family obligations. Families stay put for most of that time, so the husband leaves, returns, periodically. Circular labor migration is often overlooked in the larger climate migration literature. That's my area of expertise and what I tend to focus on. And I can say that indeed, seasonal and circular migration is not something that people have emphasized. It tends to be an emphasis on permanent migration. And it's also difficult to model this and quantify it owing to a lack of data. So how can we develop models that deepen our understanding of the relationship between climate change and human migration? That's the main question today. What we can do is pull the best available quantitative data, and these are data from the Census of India. They talk about the measure the male agricultural workforce participation. Did that for 2001 and 2011. And then we join that to a place location database, so we can actually spatialize these data by knowing where these people are located. And then we can add additional variables such as the percent of the irrigated land by village, major crop data, et cetera. And then we also have data on precipitation, and so we constructed a drought index called the SP. So we have monthly drought data for every individual village for 40 years. We have Indian censuses recording for 2001 and 2011. We know male agrarian workforces and changes therein for these years. And we use fixed effects model with a 5-year time lags for our regression analysis. The question is basically, was there a drought in the village right before the census was recorded? We do that for both census years, 2001 and 2000. We investigate the male agrarian workforce change. So we model the share of male employment in agriculture as the dependent variable because local non-farm jobs in rural India are chronically scarce. So as I mentioned before, there really are very few alternatives to farm labor when you're living in a rural area. So that pushes many men into the circular labor migration pattern. So we can infer from labor force participation data, essentially, whether people are leaving the village to move to urban areas. That hopefully does. So here's some data on the workforce composition in the movement away from agriculture, the village level analysis for the in time period between 2001 and 2011. So here we see the change in male labor force participation. And areas that are in dark red are seeing considerably more dramatic declines in the percentage of population, percentage of males working in the agricultural sector. You can see a zoom in this map. You can also look at the standardized precipitation in evapotranspiration index, the SPEI that I mentioned earlier, and identify those regions of India during this time frame. In this case, the time slice is 2009 that have experienced drought. And you can see that the Gangetic Plain is pretty prone to drought from the red there. There are, deviations from normal precipitation. Normal conditions would be around 0, abnormal, moderate drought, extreme drought, and exceptional drought would be in the dark red. And again, this is sort of a zoom in on an area that we're particularly interested in. So what you see here is changes in male and agricultural labor force participation for the whole population, male and female, in the years following a drought. So T-1 means at the time of the census, we're talking about 1 year prior to that census year. So if it's a 2011 census, we're talking about 2010. Was there a drought in that year? And what was the impact on male labor force participation? What you see is that generally there's a negative impact for that 1 year following the drought. In this case, it's not male, but it's both the entire population. Agricultural labor force participation declines as a result, and especially under severe drought conditions. You can see this mapped here on this chart, and basically Gujarat. So sorry, I'm forgetting the name of this. Yeah. So they see particularly strong impacts of 1 and 5 year lag, average lag. So there's sort of an average. You can take an average of 5 years of drought data. And so they took the 5-year average and looked at the impacts. And so these two states are particularly highly impacted with declines in labor force participation, agricultural labor force participation. And what you can see here is that Uttar Pradesh and Bihar are also heavily impacted. Here we see what the future might look like in the case of India. And so what you're seeing is basically under a high emission scenario with a kind of 1 year lag, you might see something like 1 to 2% decline in agricultural labor force participation. And under a situation where you have a 5-year average before before the time of observation, if you project forward the relationship that we have here, you will basically see a much greater decline in agricultural labor force participation, up to an extreme of 5% declines under a high emission scenario. So this is how you can take the relationship that we know from the past on drought and agricultural labor force participation and project it forward using climate scenario. There are some implications. If the results are correct, we would expect to see more movement from rural areas to cities under increased drought conditions in the future. Yet, the question is, why do we observe these findings? And this approach says nothing about the individual or household level aspirations to move. It also doesn't talk a lot about other factors like land fragmentation, changing aspirations, economic opportunities, and mechanization. Then finally, we really don't know a lot about who is migrating. Is it scheduled tribes and castes? Is it other backward classes? Just the general population? So knowing more about that would entail having to go to the field and actually interviewing people. So our plan is in January to go to the field in Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh. We already have contracted with a local survey research firm, and we'll go and talk to 2,000 to 3,000 households in remote rural areas. And we want to better understand how particularly crop insurance policies, guaranteed wage labor schemes, caste dynamics, and thick description, meaning anthropological and more deep understanding of how migration decisions are formed, take place. And this is just some shots from that area. We are privileged to work with a colleague from University of Amsterdam, Robin van Dijn, and he's already done research in this area. He knows the populations well, and so he's also worked with us to help formulate the decisions. Robin was a former visiting postdoc of mine, so we have a close relationship with him. That concludes part one of the research. I hope I haven't thoroughly confused anyone in the room. We'll now go to talk about broad global and regional urbanization trends. Here you see a chart basically, and so, future climate risk is really the conjunction of changing urban population, particularly larger and growing urban populations, and climate factors. So I'm going to start with the urban part, and then I'm going to go to the climate factors. So here you see a trend, a chart that shows from 1960 to 2050, the projected, the past and projected changes in urban population in India in red, and basically it's one of the least urbanized, demographically large countries, frankly. So there's still a very large rural population that I referred to earlier, but it is rapidly growing, and you can see the number of cities in India that are likely to grow, to the size of 10 million or more is growing rapidly. Even by 2030, they project 7 cities over 10 million population. Growth rates globally, you can see that, frankly, in the last 20 years, well, not the last 20 years, but roughly 30-year period from 1990 to 2018, you see, and this is all from the World Urbanization Prospects, a UN report. You can see the red and red areas are basically urban growth rates of 5% or more. And we see rapid growth, particularly in those small to medium-sized urban areas. It's not necessarily the megacities that are growing in this way. They've already experienced their peak growth. It's these medium to small cities that are going to see the greatest growth. You can also map this, and we have not only grids, this is data that we disseminate through our data center at Columbia University. It's called the CDAC Data Center, run in conjunction with NASA. And these are some data that show urbanization levels in different regions. And then you can also, from that same data center, identify the areas that are likely to be urbanized in the future urban footprints, essentially. And so these are projections under different future scenarios. So let's turn also briefly to these sort of global trends in climate as they relate to cities. So, we're likely to see more extreme heat. We already are seeing it, let's face it. It's not a future reality, it's a current reality. We're likely to see flooding. We're already seeing flooding, right? And of course, drought is also a major issue in many cities. So I'm going to look at some of I'm not going to talk so much about the implications, but already that there's implications for health, labor productivity, energy demand, loss and damage to infrastructure, loss of lives, and water supply, and many other things. So let's just take quickly a look, because I want to get to our second CIESIN research project, a little bit at some of these trends. This is a former postdoc of mine, Cascade Tucholsky, who's become one of the world-renowned experts on extreme heat. So this is just an exercise in looking at changes in person days per year, okay? So that's like taking every person in Delhi and saying, if you pass a certain threshold of heat, we're going to just add you, and then we're going to keep adding that for every day in which there's an extreme heat event. These extreme heat events are measured by wet bulb globe temperature above 30 degrees Celsius. To you, that may seem like a mild spring day. Some other people, it's a hotter day. But the reality is that hot, humid heat does kill, and you can actually set that threshold higher and get slightly different results. But at a global level, for this global analysis, he used that as a sort of a nice threshold. And what you see is a rapid increase in this chart, in a very dramatic increase from 1985 to 2013. 2015, 2016 was really the end date of the number of person days per year where these extreme heat days are experienced, all right? But it's rapidly growing, 2.1 billion person days per year annual increase. That's a lot of people. But part of it is due to population exposure. So that's more and larger populations in urban areas. And part of that is due to the trends that we see in extreme warming. And so the warming trend amounts to about 0.7 persons days per year. It's really dwarfed by the population increase trend. And so these are things that we see around the world. What you can see here is a breakdown of each individual city by the person days per year. Similar work has been done to project it into the future. He's actually working himself on his own projections, but this was something that I found that the World Resources Institute had done, and they just look at the mean. So these are heat waves that are defined as 3 or more consecutive days in which high temperatures equal or exceed the 90th percentile for maximum temperature. And for low-income countries, heat wave frequency will increase from 4.7 events per year to 6.9 events per year. And so what you're seeing is essentially in this under a Paris Agreement world, we'd see an increase of about 4.7 to 4.7 events per year. So that's the 1.5 degree scenario that we're all hoping for, but a 3-degree scenario would result in an even greater number of events per year, affecting the larger numbers of populations. Let's just take a look quickly at floods. So this is basically showing in red those areas that are growing, urban areas that are growing 50% greater in flood zones than they are growing in non-flood zones. So, and then the orange areas are those areas that are growing at 10 to 50% greater in flood zones than non-flood zones. See a lot of Africa, a lot of South America are growing very rapidly into flood zones. Higher income countries tend not to be growing as much into those flood zones. My suspicion is it's largely because of zoning regulations that prohibit growth into those areas. But other parts of the world, and particularly upper middle income countries, are growing very rapidly. That's the chart on the left. In the low income countries, it's a little bit in between. So this gives you an idea of where people are moving into floods. This is a forecast, so this is out to 2030, not that far around the corner. I have to caution that it was done about 10 years ago, so at that time, 2030 seemed like a pretty far distant period. But what you see here is in India, for instance, this bar in the lower left, it's a little hard to see, I'm sorry, on this computer here in the room, but this bar is showing very high growth forecasted expansion into high frequency flood risk zones in India. The only other region that sees, there's no other region that sees quite as much. China sees a lot, but it's not quite as much as India. And that's particularly due to coastal growth. So places like Mumbai, Kolkata are all growing rapidly. Drought can also be measured in the same way. So movement and expansion into drought zones. And India sees a lot of growth into the semi-arid zone and a little less in arid and hyper-arid. China is the region that really sees the most growth by 2030 into semi-arid areas. Finally, past and projected water security, scarcity. This is really just basically saying if you're in purple, you're now currently, the light purple, you're currently affected by seasonal water shortage. So it's already an issue in these purple cities. You can see basically India as mostly purple. There's very few cities that are not affected by seasonal water shortages. New seasonal water shortages projected out to 2050 are in the dark purple. So then you can then look at these issues of zero water days. So Bangalore was affected last year. You're all familiar with that episode, but it was predated by a major drought in Cape Town. You heard about the 0 day in Cape Town back in June 2018. And Sao Paulo saw something like the same situation in 2015. I actually had climate science colleagues who are from Brazil develop these maps for me showing the degree of SPEI. I described SPEI earlier as a drought index, and you can see how it's centered in 2014, 2015, right over Sao Paulo. But I was also shown a chart of drought trends going back about 30, 40 years in Brazil. And the somewhat interesting element is that actually they'd had similar droughts in Sao Paulo in the past. They just hadn't been able to maintain the infrastructure in a way. So the reservoirs were silting. When you get siltation in reservoirs, the actual volume of water that this reservoir can contain declines. So this is a major issue in many cities, is if you're not maintaining your reservoirs and your infrastructure, you're more likely to experience these 0 days. So how am I doing on time? I fear that, so I have about 15 minutes left, something like 15 minutes. All right, thanks. Being very gracious. So this is the kind of pièce de la résistance, as we say in French. It's where we talk about how this all comes together in urban settings. So how does climate and how does the existence and the growth of these poor populations coincide? So here you see the framework that we were commissioned by the U.S. Agency for International Development, may she rest in peace. The aid we were literally working on this until December of last year. Thank God we finished the project before aid was eliminated. And I have a lot to say about that, but I'm gonna also hold my peace for now. So the effort was basically looking at how populations, low income populations, low socioeconomic status populations in cities, within cities, are experienced to past environmental hazards, such as extreme heat, water scarcity, cyclones, storm surge, riverine flooding, and air pollution, and also how the city as a whole in the future may experience future risk. We could do the past stuff at a much higher resolution, so we could intersect the lowest socioeconomic status neighborhoods with climate and other hazards from the past, but we couldn't, my goodness, thank you for the food. We couldn't do the same scale research in the future, because if you know anything about climate risk data, when you do it into the future, you tend to project it at a fairly coarse resolution. There's a lot of geographers here, so I assume you know something about GIS and the kind of things that we need to do. So first, how did we get low socioeconomic status populations for every city of the world, every low income and moderate income city in the world? We did this using a very clever method that my colleague at CIESIN, Dana Thompson, she runs something called Idea Maps. If you're not familiar with Idea Maps, you should be, because it's an amazing effort to do really advance the field of slum and informal settlement mapping globally. So Idea Maps was funded by the Gates, is still funded by the Gates Foundation, and it has collaborators all over the world. But my colleague, Dana Thompson, is at the very center and at the very middle of all that work. And she really someone that I would like to get on in one of these seminars in the future. But what she did was she used OpenStreetMap data. I'm not going to go into data sources, and another data set on building footprints, which you can now obtain globally, and looked at those parts of cities. This is a idealized view of a city. And basically what you're looking at here is parts of the city where household plots, where you have houses, but you have no roads. The roads are in red, and basically that suggests that these are places that are physically isolated from the rest of the city. And so getting services, getting access to jobs, things like that, water and sanitation are probably non-existent in these areas. So we were able to do this using these existing global data sets. It's actually, we didn't invent the idea, but a group called the Million Neighborhoods Project had done something like this. Some of you may be familiar with that work. But we simply took it to another level. We scaled that work. They only had done it for Africa. We also improved the methodology, I think, substantially. So this is Alexandria, Egypt, and you can see the red areas represent low socioeconomic status neighborhoods, generally less well-planned, generally less access to the infrastructure of the city. And you can see the map on the lower right shows those low socioeconomic status neighborhoods in relation to the rest of the city. We did this for every city, but these are examples of cities where we actually had locally generated slum maps at either government agencies or local populations. You've heard of Map Kibera and some of these efforts globally. Well, these are maps that have been validated by local people. So what you see is basically the black areas are the validated maps, the red areas are our estimates, and there's a pretty high degree of spatial correspondence. but you wouldn't necessarily expect 100% correspondence because our definition is slightly more generous, meaning we incorporate more areas. And so that's why we're calling them low socioeconomic status and not necessarily slum or informal settlement neighborhood. These data are now available through the Harvard Dataverse, and so you can actually download them. And I can send you the links. I'm very happy to do all that after this talk. So this is an example of some of the cities of Indonesia. I just happen to have better maps for Indonesia. I'm going to show something for Calcutta a little bit later, but this is Calicut. It's a city in the southern part of Java. And we just happen to have very nice maps showing past climate stressors and environmental stressors in this area. And basically what you see is it's a city that's already exposed to very high water scarcity. It's already exposed to storm surge in different parts of Calicut. Riverine flooding is a perennial issue in the city. And it also has air pollution issues in parts of the city. So if you overlay that with the lowest socioeconomic status areas showed here in this upper left-hand corner, you get an idea of exposure units. So what we can do is say, for every one of these stressors, for every population in these, and we can basically add up people who are exposed to one or more stressors. One of the things I'll just say parenthetically here in the lower right hand, we talk about the text, this text here, which is that there are reasons why vulnerable and low socioeconomic status people are often forced into less safe areas. It basically has to do with rent markets. It's the rents in cities. Most of you are familiar with this. If you live closer to your work and your job, you're going to pay a higher rent. So people end up living in precarious place because it's a trade-off. I can live in this poor sanitation, flood-prone area and get to my work more easily or get access to certain things that I need to get access to. I can maintain my social network in that area. I was just talking to a colleague at JMI, and she was talking about this issue precisely in Mumbai, where people basically, that social capital they have in the slum is far more valuable to them than living 45 minutes to an hour or 2 hours outside the city in some very distant area that may be safe from hazard, but has basic problems in terms of, or basic lack of social capital. And so that's another important observation in this work. So we also looked at future risks. I'm not going to go into the details here, but most of these future risks are analogous to the risks that I described in the past, but they include new risks such as landslides. So we had future projections of landslides. The summary results were something that USAID wanted for its programming. That programming will no longer happen, but the result is actually available to anyone. And we need to get this report out. We're doing a publication based on this work, but the report has a lot of valuable information that needs to get out. So we'll get that done. But what you see is cities like Jakarta have a lot of current vulnerabilities in low socioeconomic status neighborhoods. But when you look at the future, they also, many cities in Southeast Asia, because of their high heat and humidity indices, you get high projections of heat risk, high water scarcity, etc. You can look at whole countries, so you can tally the entire population of urban low socioeconomic status population by country and look at the risks that they're subjected to as well. Pakistan is one of the highest risk countries with most of the low socioeconomic status population, frankly, exposed to at least 3 or more risks. Vietnam also has a lot in Bangladesh. You don't see India here. Why? Because initially this work was carried out for USAID. USAID was not funding India, so they excluded India. That said, in subsequent work, we've gone ahead and done India, and this is Calcutta. What you can see is this is the low socioeconomic status population based on that definition I gave you earlier. You can also see that the entire city of Calcutta is exposed to warm spells, extreme heat, water scarcity, cyclones, and high particulate matter. You have storm surge flooding in areas of Calcutta that I understand this is a river. So maybe the storm surge goes up the river and floods areas, and you have exposure to seasonal and riverine flooding here. And the results can be then summarized. Here you see Kolkata, which I was just describing, with the low socioeconomic status population is exposed to a lot of environmental vulnerabilities. And in the future, the city of Calcutta will also see a lot of extreme heat, hurricane force winds, and seasonal river flooding. But we can also do that, and we have done it for every other city. And I just asked my colleagues to pull out some examples for 3 representative cities. Mumbai may seem relatively less prone, exposed. It doesn't mean it's not exposed. It just means that the low socioeconomic status populations of the city are not as exposed as in Chennai and in Kolkata, just to be clear about that. And also you can kind of see the relative proportion of the population exposed to 2 or more climate risks. You can also see this total for India, and this gives you an idea of how, and I'll leave these slides with you and you can circulate them so that you can take a look closely. But roughly 23 or 24% of the population, low socioeconomic status urban population, is exposed to 2 or more environmental risks. So overall, we can say that there's a large population of low socioeconomic status people in Asia. This is not even including India, but we have more people in just 5 countries in Asia than we have in all of Africa in low socioeconomic status urban areas, urban populations. We have a lot of extreme heat, water scarcity, river flooding, et cetera, and we have high humid heat. So, and that's going to be a continued issue into the future. None of this is news to you, I know, but I'm just sharing what the results of at least a more standardized and consistent analysis provides you with. So the geographic approach we've taken identifies high-risk cities and neighborhoods within cities. We can target resources better, and there's a transparency of methods that we can share with you. Those results will be published hopefully in the MPJ Urban Sustainability Journal, but we'll also share the report that this is based upon. So I think that ends my presentation. I have some backup slides on adaptation, and I'm not going to go to those. I will simply note that if we want to talk about some of those adaptation measures, we can, because I have some backup slides to talk about. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. And I'm sure people have lots of questions, and you perhaps also inputs on some of the methodological choices that you've made. We have a lot of people here who work with similar data sets. Okay, maybe I can then ask Mr. Chetan.
Yes,
Okay, Saida, ma'am, please ask your question. You're going first, and then after that, I'll call Chetan, sir.
yes, sir. I'm very much glad to participate this privilege of I'm Saida from Belgavi Smart City, and very delighted to be a part of this NIUA Expert Talk series. Already from Belgavi Smart City, we have oh wow, that is One World, One Window program we have started for these migration people, for helping these migrants, youth and all adults and senior citizens. That is a visionary step towards fostering sustainable, equitable, inclusive and accessible development for children and youth. Our OWOW aims to reach beyond public school systems across the globe, creating an inclusive digital ecosystem that supports every child, especially those impacted by migration, displacement, or social stress. A vibrant collection of stories, educational content, and vital wellness resources are there, available in multiple Indian languages, ensuring accessibility for children from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds. I am not having any question. My thing is that I want to say that we are from Belgavi Smart City. We already started a project that is One World, One Window, which is helping the migrant people from especially from rural area to urban area. Thank you.
And I'll also call Mr. Chetan Nandini, who is the Deputy Municipal Commissioner of Rajkot Municipal Corporation. Chetan sir, if you're here and you can give us your inputs.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Rajkot is a city where we see a lot of migration happening.
Can you speak up a little bit? We can't hear you very well.
Yeah. Uh, is it clear now?
Can we
Am I
increase the
audible
volume
now?
from here a little bit? So go ahead, we'll increase the volume from here.
Yeah. So Rajkot is a place where we have a lot of migration, and it is not a very big city. It's not a small town also. So probably the ideal case where we see such a transition happening. What we see is that there is a immediate need for housing, water, and other civic infrastructure. So what we do is first we address it through rapid implementation of town planning schemes. Probably that gives us a lot of land for civic infrastructure. Again, our crucial asset is water, because we just have 25 to 30% of water available locally. Rest water comes from Namada, which is 400 kilometers away from the city. And we have to fill our reservoirs twice a year or thrice a year through this Sony integrated scheme. So that has prompted us to probably reuse wastewater and also to ensure that we reduce our NRW. So at present in our city, we have a mix of DI pipelines for DI pipeline distribution network and old conventional pipes. So we are converting our conventional pipes to DI pipes, which is helping us to reduce NRW. Plus we are using systems like SCADA and so as to ensure that the NRW is reduced. We have a smart city project wherein we have created a greenfield infrastructure in a 930-acre area. There we have enabled that we will be providing a whole new ecosystem for treated wastewater. So we have put up a 16 MLD TTP, and from that TTP, we'll be supplying treated water to each and every house, which will be metered. So that will be one area where we will be addressing water issues. Another is housing. Housing, we are building a lot of new houses again under PMAY scheme, but there, because of very hot climate, the livability was an issue earlier. So there, with the help of a international partner, we carried out an design charade, and we put in a lot of interventions like changing the orientation of the whole building, creating cavity walls, like resizing the sizes of doors and windows. And therein we could reduce the temperature of the dwelling units by 5%. And that improved the livability of the buildings. So such interventions in public housing is helping us probably to like relocate the slums and attract people toward the affordable housings. Again, for climate mitigation, we are having a net zero climate action plan by 2070. We are in process of creating a city investment plan for the same. We had an inventory of like what is probably affecting the air quality of the city, and we could like improve the quality of our transport by investing in e-buses. So at present, 100% of the fleet is green fleet, about say 150 e-buses and 100 CNG buses. We are again expecting 100 e-buses under PM EY scheme. So probably the whole green transport will help us to at least reduce our emission levels from public transport. Again, we are heavily investing in blue-green infrastructure throughout the city. We have an ambitious project of interlinking all the open water drains, where we'll be probably converting them to like small check dams, whereby the water can be harvested. So probably these are the few interventions which we are doing at city level to ensure that whatever effects are there due to transition, high migration, and rapid urbanizations are being met.
One of the things that I'll just pull out from here is just the variety of really innovative approaches you're taking at the local level. And so these global analyses, I think, are useful to a point, but you really need to, the action has to happen on the ground. So both of you are to be commended for making progress in that area, and particularly addressing the needs of those who are moving recently to urban areas. This is something that we're not, you might want to wish it away in some cases. You may not want to necessarily see a lot more migration to urban areas, but it will happen. And so accommodations will need to be made. Thanks.
So much, Ms. Saida and Mr. Chetan. Thank you so much for giving your inputs. I'd like to open the floor to everyone in the room for questions. We could have a few. Anybody has questions, or maybe I can ask? Could you come up here and talk into the mic? There's one here, don't worry.
Thank you so much for taking us through such detailed presentation. My question is regarding the satellite data. So we have done a few climate action plans, few flood resilience strategies here, which were heavily dependent on the satellite data. But there has been a parallel criticism to the freely available Landsat satellite data which is available from the point of view of heat and flood analysis, because they do not consider nighttime temperatures a lot of times, because the satellite just moves at one point. So the availability of data, the granularity, accuracy, and sometimes the results are very contrasting. So I just wanted to understand that how do you validate wherever you use the satellite data? One thing is ground truthing, but doing a global level study, maybe. So what are your validation techniques? Because this involves a lot of multiple data sets. Yeah, that's
a great question. So what I'd say is, no, we can't validate the global data sets. What we rely on is peer review, which is not always the same as local validation, right? So if now, presumably most of these data sets published in the scientific literature have had some kind of validation, but whether it's at a local level in every case, or it may be a bit, what's the word, haphazard in terms of where they actually collect the ground truth data. The Landsat data are, guess the overpasses in the morning, so they don't typically capture the evening or nighttime temperatures. MODIS has a nighttime land surface temperature data set, which I've used, and we've measured heat island. We actually have a separate data set that I didn't mention that measures heat islands for every city in the world. And two, really, one does incorporate more high resolution imagery. And so I can talk to you offline about some of those data. But yeah, I mean, I think you're raising a really critical point, is the data are only as good as the effort to validate and to also be transparent in the methods that are used, so that you know what you're getting at the end of the pipeline. So really critical point. Thanks for bringing it up.
There are two of our colleagues online, Srinivas and Nisha. If you can unmute yourself and speak. Is it okay, Professor, if we take both questions together and then you can
Absolutely, I'll be happy to.
Yeah, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Srinivas. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Dr. Alex, it'll be interesting to actually, during this study, to see under, obviously you said you were going to see the criteria for migration, right? Under what conditions people migrate, and then parameters, right? But it'll be interesting to see head of the household moving versus the family moving, right? So if there are 4 members per household, And if only the head of the family is actually migrating for work, but the family is staying back in the rural areas, under what conditions, right? Is it severe drought conditions? Is it for a better living? Because if it is for better living, then if you strengthen the rural communities in terms of the facilities, then only the head of the household will move, earn in a urban space, and then send the money back home, right? So under what conditions it'll be, as you do the studies, it'll be interesting to see such criteria too. So to lessen the strain on the urban resources.
Thank you. Nisha,
Yeah, am I audible?
you can unmute yourself. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, sure. So hello everyone. Myself Nisha. So first of all, I would say definitely it was a very interesting presentation to know about how you're actually mapping out that because of this, I mean, how climate will actually have an impact on rural to urban migration. So my question is basically this is definitely going to happen in the near future. But I mean, we are aware that in India, very and many companies and startups are also coming in, and companies are also trying to see how they can relate their goals with the ESG. So I would like to know how basically the companies could actually relate their ESG goals with the problems that are coming up and can convert it into opportunities for their business. If let's say you can throw any light upon that.
Wow, that's a good question. So I'll answer both.
You can answer whatever you want.
Yeah, so the first one, I think I'll take note of some of your suggestions about, whether people are moving as households. What we've seen here up until now, what I understand, and again, I haven't been the primary person conducting this work, but Robin Van Dyne has been studying this for a number of years now, and he says typically it is just the household head, and the household remains behind because of connections to the land and the communities. But it's an open question whether there might be more entire household migration in the future. One of the purposes is to look at crop insurance policies, guaranteed wage labor, and other schemes that might actually lessen the propensity to move. So these are things that they want to look at and see if that actually does play a role in decision making. A lot to explore because it's a big topic, and India is a vast country, but these are some of the things that we want to start looking at. For the second on ESG efforts by companies, I'm less familiar. So there might be agricultural concerns, major also not just producing crops, but also processing facilities. There may be large agro-food and I imagine all of these could play a role in helping rural families. This is, again, something that I hesitate to speak extensively about because I'm not very expert on the local situation. And I imagine they may be less present in cases where there's this smallholder agriculture than they would be in areas with large, say, more plantation style agriculture. But again, I'll withhold further comment because I don't really know the context.
Thank you. I think there's another Siri. You can actually unmute yourself and ask your question, but I'd request you to keep it short. I know you've typed in 2 questions into the Q&A box. And if there's anyone else from the room, if you could keep your question ready.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the valuable insight. I will keep it quick. I wanted to understand in 3 parts how NIUA is looking to solve with idea boards how SES vulnerable groups are actually going to be dealt with, handled in a sustainable way with systemic change, especially in tier 2 cities, which bear the brunt of tier 3 cities and rural cities that are moving in. Secondly, I wanted to understand if the idea boards also include systemic changes in education and if socio-cultural rehabilitation would work in this case.
I think, Siri, if you can just hold on, we'll probably take those in our closing remarks because your questions seem to be more addressed to us than to Professor Alex today. So if there are questions for the professor, that would be great. Yeah. We'll come back to you on this, Siri.
Mine is not a question, it's a comment in the sense that won't we see reverse migration happening also because, like, for example, if urban areas actually get hot and uncomfortable, maybe a reverse migration to the rural, which may not be captured by the data. This issue of data analysis does give us a larger picture. If we match it with some ground level, we get a more kind of a intensive picture of the crisis. It is also natural. Okay, so last week we had another presentation in Chicago where they were trying to relate mortality rates with climate, flooding and high tide. By linking with the pin codes, that was giving very, very harsh kind of a picture. So if we do that, are there other studies which are doing that or
So the University of Chicago study was doing it for the US or was doing it for?
For the city of Mumbai.
Okay. Well, this area is, let's say, flourishing. So there's more and more work in this area. It's hard to keep track of everything that's going on, frankly. It's really quite impressive. So, and, doesn't surprise me that there's been, studies on a local level in Mumbai with US counterparts. You asked a first question, which had to do with the reverse. Yeah, I think that we might see some migration out of cities. This has been hypothesized, and there's actually some limited evidence that, like Mexico City, after some of the earthquakes they experienced, that there was actually an out migration to secondary cities. These would have been largely well-off people who had the means. I think one of the concepts that's arising more and more in the area of climate mobility research is the concept of involuntary immobility. What was called a decade ago trapped populations. These are populations that lack the means to move because they simply are too impoverished to really move to somewhere else. They don't have as much. They don't have the expanded choice sets that most of us have. They are limited in terms of their mobility, and so I think we'll wait and see if that's in fact the case. That people in fact do choose to leave cities because of extreme heat or recurring flooding or things of that sort. I will say, yeah, go ahead, sir. No, I would just complete my thought, and that is that this same concept of involuntary mobility has largely been applied in the rural context, and the idea being that if you're really poor and you have few household assets and a disaster wipes out takes away your cow or takes away your house or your farm implements or something like that, and say a major flood or something, that ability to rebound and therefore kind of regroup and then move out becomes more restricted. But what we have seen in the literature is very clear is essentially this mitigation of risk or risk reduction strategy of having income from multiple baskets. And that's why, in fact, you do see the rural to urban migration. Yeah. Sorry, sir.
Thank you. I had a couple of quick questions. One, I'm not very sure if there is a measure, but if there is, do you have any measure for per capita climate-induced income deficit in urban areas?
Climate-induced income deficits. I haven't seen that, but what you're seeing, so I just attended a conference in Leeds in the UK, University of Leeds. It was called Scenarios Forum. And if you can imagine future scenarios, there's probably somebody who has done something in this space. Scenarios Forum uses this concept of these shared socioeconomic pathways, and it's basically 5 alternative future broad narratives that describe how the future might unfold, with some of them representing high emissions and divisions like between high and low income people within countries as well as globally. You know, this is a world with high trade barriers. This is the Donald Trump world, SSP3 they call it. And there's an SSP1 world, which is much more sustainable. And then there's variants on this. And so they started looking, you know, they've been looking at a range of things. And one of the things that I found very interesting, so there's gender indices that a group in India has developed for future climate. They call it a gender climate risk index. And I have some slides on that if you want to see them later offline. But, you know, it's really an interesting concept, looking at how climate may impact gender differentials and vulnerability in the future. But they also talked about, other economists talked about debt burdens from climate change and debt to GDP ratios. And I've thought about this some, not a lot, but essentially most climate impacts represent an economic bad, right? It's not an economic good. You've got a disaster, you've got loss and damage. If you invest money in adaptation, you may reduce that loss and damage, but it's not money that has a return on investment. You float a bond to put a dike in, or you float a bond to put in some major infrastructure to, you know, cooling shelters or whatever it may be that is required in order for the population to withstand extreme heat. Those are not necessarily going to return economically. So what essentially climate change represents is a huge drain on the public purse. And so those debt to GDP ratios are likely to increase in the future.
Another question is, you presented data which suggested that the migration is of a temporary nature. And if that were to be true, what is the implication for urbanization and for spatial planning?
It has a number of implications. If it's temporary or if it's males only, then they have implications about housing strategies. It may mean that, you know, pardon me if I use an anecdote, but I was in Peace Corps in West Africa. So my brother from the village, meaning the person I knew best, was back in the 1980s when I was young. And he went to Paris eventually, and he got a job there. And it was a pattern of the ethnic group that I worked with to go to Paris, work for a period, and come back to their village. Sometimes they wouldn't return, but once every 5 or 10 years. Sometimes it was even longer periods. But they would build up a nest egg and then return to their village. When they lived in Paris, they lived in what are called dortoirs or dormitories. These were basically large single room occupancy units with shared kitchens. And, you know, that kind of solution might be the sort of thing that would be more, let's say, a better environment than, say, having to find a very poor accommodation in slum area. Whether or not they would be used, it's a whole separate social and cultural issue, you know, whether that's culturally appropriate or not. You do have some sit there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room, or we could do burning questions?
Global analysis of the independence. So from a socio-economic point of view, from a socio-economic point of view, are there any parameters that the Indian census might have missed out so far? Because India had the last and there is one upcoming census that will start next year.
Okay.
So are there any socio-economic parameters that would enhance your insights maybe regarding the migration?
Yeah, there's always a trade-off, especially for large data collection efforts, between comprehensiveness and you know, the ability to carry it out and you know, the time it takes, the effort. So I mean, inevitably climate related and environmental researchers who are focusing on climate migration want to have more information about livelihood systems, and they want a lot more detail on risk reduction at the household level mechanisms. And I don't have specific questions that I would, right off the bat, but I think those would be the kinds of things that would be useful. And are also fairly unlikely to happen on a national census basis because you just can only ask so many questions. So there are also data that can be collected from agricultural and other censuses. And then, of course, there's survey research that gives you a pretty good idea, with less comprehensiveness, sampling the population to understand some of these important elements related to coping and adaptive capacities of the population. So those would be some things that I'd say out there. Great.
Thank you. I mean, there's a final sort of a question that I think can cap it all off. It's from Asif, who's a colleague of ours who works on climate issues. His question is basically, what do you think the takeaways or inputs are for the Indian urban sector? Like, what kind of urban action agenda are you, recommending or the broad?
Well, I hesitate again to recommend anything. You were really the experts, and I saw you nodding about certain things, so you're very informed, obviously, about what's going on, not only in India, but globally on some of these research strands. I think that, your colleague brought up the question of extreme heat. It's come up several times. I think this is going to be a critical issue. The Gangetic Plain, if you look at any global map of areas that experience, extreme heat, that it pops out. And so that's going to be an important issue. There's also something that I've been paying attention to on and off is the issue of groundwater depletion in some of the agricultural areas. And, that you run out of water, you're going to see a lot more people moving out of rural areas. So then that implies you're going to have to come up with more efficient uses of water resources. And that implies maybe, so I know that at least in the past, my last visit, I actually met with Ashok Khosla, the Director of Development Alternatives. This is back in the 1990s. So I first came to India around that time. And I was visiting Karnataka State, and I visited an area using tanks. These are the traditional system of irrigation. You're all familiar with them. The tanks were basically being discarded in favor of boreholes. And what I was told at that time, and I think it may have remained true until recently, may still be true, that the electricity used to pump the water out of the ground was actually subsidized by the Indian government. And so it's not to say you have to pull those subsidies. These are poor farmers, and I'm not suggesting, but certainly you'd want to develop more efficient water management technologies. And they were proposing the revitalization of the tank system. The tanks had largely become silted, and so therefore we're not carrying as much water as they had in the past. So there could be actually ancient technologies or traditional technologies that could solve some of these issues. So sorry, I don't have a silver bullet, but every country is going to have to solve some of these issues.
So thank you very much. I think there's a lot of food for thought here and a lot of methodological inputs as well for us to think about. The teams here are quite diverse. They work across solid and liquid waste, climate, water, geographers who do spatial analysis. So there's a lot of people taking away different kinds of inputs from the talk today. And I thank you very much again.